Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm John Murphy, and on behalf of the Dartmouth Free Speech Alliance, thank you for joining us. Tonight's conversation is part of our Winter Speaker Series, and it's focused on a question that has become increasingly central to campus life at Dartmouth and at colleges across the country: how institutions manage free expression in moments of real pressure. Our goal this evening is not to relitigate past controversies or to debate the merits of particular viewpoints. Instead, we want to understand how Dartmouth as an institution has learned, adapted, and made decisions when expression, protest, safety, and campus functioning come into tension. We're pleased to be joined by Ed McKenna, Dartmouth's Director of Civic Engagement, Expression, and Learning. Ed's role sits at the intersection of student life, expression, and institutional response, and it was created in response to a decade marked by increasingly complex and, at times, disruptive events on campus. Over the last 10 years, Dartmouth has hosted a wide range of speakers, panels, and protests. Some of these events proceeded smoothly, others generated significant disruption. More recently, events such as the Dartmouth encampment in May 2024 underscored how quickly situations can escalate and how difficult it is for colleges to balance open expression while maintaining a functional academic environment. Tonight's discussion is an opportunity to hear directly from someone responsible for navigating those trade-offs in real time. We'll start by asking Ed about his background and how this role came to exist, then move into Dartmouth's experience over the past decade, what the college learned from the moments that didn't go as planned, and how those lessons shape policy and decision-making today. We're grateful to Ed for his willingness to engage candidly, and we're grateful to all of you for joining us for what we hope will be a thoughtful and substantive conversation. Ed, thank you again for being here. Let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us about your background, how long you've been at Dartmouth, and why your current role was created? What problem was the college trying to solve when this work became more formalized?
Sure. Thanks, John. I appreciate the intro and apologies to anyone on here. There's a little background noise. I'm on the third floor of Collis, which is a very active space at night for students and student org. Um, to truncate my experience a little bit, I've been in higher ed for 18 years. I've worked in various roles from a writing instructor to a women's rugby coach and at Montana State before I moved back to this area. I'm originally from New England. I was the assistant dean of students for student conduct. And so I oversaw the entire conduct program at Montana State. I also worked with all the fraternities there, and I handled Clery compliance. So I've worked with college students now again for about 18 years in various roles, and I love higher ed. My undergraduate experience really shaped my desire to work in higher ed and to work with college students and to be able to positively shape their experience. I have been at Dartmouth for it will be 4 years this June, so just over 3.5 years. And I was onboarded in student life as an assistant dean for student life, and that role was created I had a number of things in my portfolio, including civic engagement was one of those, working with and helping new or students interested in having organizations recognized. So I worked with COSO, the Council on Student Organizations, but I also was tasked with working with our politically affiliated student organizations. And prior to my arrival, there had been these organizations had been hosting high profile guests. And so I was really tasked with, all right, like let's get a handle on these events. Let's formalize some processes. Let's support these student organizations. And so it's not kind of a mishmash of where do I go? What do I do? We wanted to put in place some policies and processes to make it easier for students and student orgs to have high profile events, to have to feel supported and to help with planning and management of those events. So that's really kind of why I was onboarded and why that position was created. There had been, I think it's important to highlight that there had been significant effort made by my colleagues who are still in, well, one of them is still in student life. We've had some departures, but who had attempted to do some of that work. I've seen the memos that were written to try to formalize some things. They put a committee together on freedom of expression and dissent to come to bring colleagues together from different areas, say, all right, here's this event we know about. How are we going to manage this? How can we help support the group? How do we respond to disruption? But it really was never, nothing was formalized. Nothing was codified. And the way they were finding out about events was like kind of haphazard. It was a flyer or word of mouth. So really, I was tasked with, all right, like what are other institutions doing? What programs do they have? And how can we implement those here? Again, to better support these events and student organizations and to support the programs themselves. So.
That's great. Thank you so much. There have been a number of controversial speakers and events over the past decade or so. You and I talked a bit offline about sort of the broader political trends in the country, particularly the rise of MAGA, sort of right-wing populism, the election of Donald Trump in 2016, which I think brings us to, I guess you could say, the current era of political controversy at Dartmouth. Obviously, there have been controversies in the past going back decades, but for the purposes of this discussion and kind of like keeping it topical, there were several in particular that we talked about. What were the challenges that you were facing across these events? And feel free to talk about any one of them in particular or just them
Mhm.
more broadly.
Yeah, so when I was onboarded in June of 2022, I kept hearing the same high-profile guest names over and over, and that was Milo Yiannopoulos, I think it was 2015 or 2016. Madison Cawthorn was an event I kept hearing about, and I think that was actually a panel, a forum. I think Catherine Levitt might have been actually a part of that panel. And then Andy No was the big event that really culminated in maybe some unwanted attention for Dartmouth. And that was an event that was supposed to be in person, that it was going to be hosted by the College Republicans. And the event, because of what was perceived to be serious threats, the Hanover police ultimately encouraged the event to be on Zoom only. As a result, there were some costs that were incurred by the College Republicans, for security and for Hanover police. And so that became a pretty, you can search it if you're interested. And, I wasn't here at that point, but that became a contentious issue on campus, and an issue potentially of, free speech and safety. And so there was a lot going on at that event. And subsequently, James O'Keefe came onto campus and came into this building and was trying to interview individuals who were actually still here, and ask them, why was that event canceled? Do you support free speech? And so that, I think, really was like the tipping point for some of my colleagues who are like, all right, we can't do this anymore. And so again, the issue was, we have, a response to an election, I think in 2016. So high profile guests are potentially from both sides, or, it's a great opportunity for students to voice their opinions, right, to express themselves. But there really wasn't a mechanism in place for students to register their events, for Dartmouth administrators and staff to have eyes on those events, to have discussions about those events, and to have plans in case, things went awry, and to work with the student groups to say, this is your event. You need to have a plan to manage this event. You need to be thinking about, what's your question and answer session look like? What is your protocol for, are you going to allow bags into or liquids into your event? So there's, things that really weren't being discussed. And ultimately, it was on student life, it was on conferences and events, it was on the Department of Safety and Security to try to hope really that these events would go smoothly. And ultimately, there were several that there were protests at or disruptions. And so those were some of the challenges. And one of those challenges was that I've noted, we had no eyes on the events. So at least what we've done in student life, although I'm no longer in student life, was an event registration process. So this is a standard practice at most institutions. So our recognized organizations and COSO, which is around 200 student organizations, they have to register all their events. So even their weekly meetings, they have to register those. And that way, if they need support, great. If they need to have a conversation, great. I oversee what's called the Open Expression Facilitator Program. So I can see those events and say, well, this seems like maybe, you never know. Given this topic, there might be a disruption. Let me reach out to the hosts and offer an open expression facilitator. And or if we've had a discussion, and by we, I mean the Freedom of Expression and Dissent Committee, which meets every Monday. If we say, yeah, we're seeing or hearing things, we want an open expression facilitator there and potentially DOS, then we can say, listen, we're worried about disruption. We're going to have some facilitators there. So that was the first really piece, is the event registration piece. And then just being able to see like, okay, we know what's going on. And then to be able to plan and also assist in planning and helping these students, who are, again, these are very high achieving students. But just because you're high achieving doesn't necessarily mean you know all the X's and O's about event planning, or thinking about all those things when you're involved so much, as many of the Dartmouth students are. So we just wanted systems in place to be able to have eyes on things and to also reach out and support, especially these student organizations, in their event planning to ensure that the program could go forth. We were set on, it doesn't matter who the speaker is. We want to ensure that anyone who comes here and is brought here by a student organization is allowed to have their time. So,
Thank you. In May 2024, I do want to talk about the Gaza encampment situation. It was occurring during a time of campus unrest at Ivy League universities across the country, related to the ongoing conflict in Gaza. And there was a Dartmouth Parkhurst encampment, if I'm understanding things correctly. There was perhaps not a coordinated response to that from the administration, if I'm characterizing that. And ultimately, the state riot police were brought in, and I understand that much of that was live streamed, and I think that many people were arrested. And if I'm not mistaken, I think there might have also been some non-Dartmouth individuals who were participating in that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. You've described that moment as a turning point. Why did that incident change how Dartmouth thinks about and responds to this type of incident?
Yeah, and I'll do my best to speak as factually as possible. And just so a couple things just to clarify. Two students had been arrested in front of Parkhurst earlier that term. They had set up a tent. They were in the tent. This was a symbolic protest for the Israel-Palestine conflict. They ultimately, after hours, were arrested, I think, for criminal trespass, and everyone can double check me on that if that's not factual. But so on May 1st, obviously these things have been happening all over the nation and at Ivy League institutions and at regional institutions. There was a multi-organizationally sponsored event on the green. And so in a symbolic gesture, and again, as was happening in other campuses, I think they erected 5 or 6 tents. The students and community members locked arm in arm. They formed a circle. I think they were chanting or singing, and they quickly put up 5 or 6 tents. I was out there as in my role as student life, but wasn't there were a couple more senior level administrators that were making contact with the students, and they did have a designated like student who was communicating with administration. And yeah, there were hundreds. I would say there are hundreds of people out there at this point. Some community organizations, student organizations, and ultimately there was breakdowns in what I would call negotiations or conversations. We, in our role, did try to advise the students that they needed to leave the green. Obviously, those advisories were not heard. They were singing, chanting. And ultimately, yeah, the riot police were on campus, which I feel comfortable saying emboldened other students who weren't part of the original event. And it resulted in 89 arrests, I think 59 of which were students. And obviously a handful of community members and or employees. Maybe I think 59 were Dartmouth affiliated, so students and or professors. Or yeah, and there were community members in there, and who were about to set up tents. There was a lot going on May 1st. So why was that a tipping point? Because obviously, I think students would say that there was a lot of harm to the community there. While anyone might be able to take different perspectives on that event, students might say, well, this is our right to express freely or protest. We have a right to protest. We have a right to be on the green. Administration might say, well, we couldn't predict what this was going to turn into. There were community members joining. How do we know when this was going to end? So I think there's a lot of different approaches, but it really resulted in intentionality and for administration and building relationships, and being able to, and just kind of changing the approach when it comes to a protest or a demonstration or a rally that might be in violation of whether it's a town ordinance or campus policy. And so we had to really, I think from a top down, really rethink like, okay, how do we approach these things? And the onboarding of Jennifer Rosales, so she's our senior vice president and chief student affairs officer, also resulted in that, like, okay, how are we going to do this? Let's expand some of our programming. So that's how I got brought into community and campus life, to be able to work with all students and staff and faculty, not just undergraduate recognized organizations. How are we working with students? How are we building relationships with our active students? And what does it look like to respond to a protest, demonstration, or rally? What are the steps? And so it brought all of us together: conferences and events, communications, Department of Safety and Security, SVP Rosales, myself, student life, because they oversee so many student organizations, to really think about what this process looks like to afford students the right to express themselves, with the balance of, well, there are laws and policies. Which of those are what hills are we going to die on, so to speak? When it comes to something like amplified sound. And so how do we navigate those things, and how do we engage more thoughtfully and have dialogue to better inform and work with students who might be partaking in those protests or demonstrations? So.
Yeah, and since then, how has it been going? I know that you had the event tonight with Scott Jennings of CNN and with Anna Navarro of The View. How did that one go?
Yeah, that's so far. Well, I was there for about 30 minutes and it was going great. So, it was, yeah, very well received. And I would say in my time here, I tell anyone who listens, I'm really proud of the students here. I think the way that they engage at events where their ideologies might be challenged, or their views might be different than others, that they sit there and will wait and ask a tough question. Right. And that's what it should be. Or if they're so opposed to the guest or the event, maybe they'll protest outside, but they're not blocking the entrance or exit or prohibiting anyone from getting in or out. And, in almost my 4 years, and since we've had the open expression facilitator program, open expression facilitators and or myself have been at over 100 events. And so, in that time, there's been there was one disruption that when we were at that event, and that was the John Fetterman event. But others that you might think like, oh wow, we'll see how our students respond to this. As recently as the TPUSA event with Will Witt, there were many people who sat in that event who were ideologically opposed to Will Witt, but waited until the end and asked tough questions. And like, isn't that how it should be? And so we've had Mike Pence here, we've had Liz Cheney here, we've had Chris Christie here, we've had Masia Linejad here. The Palestine Solidarity Coalition has had a number of high-profile guests. And so, I'm really proud of the institution and for our students to either say, well, I don't agree, so I'm not even going to go. Why would I waste my energy and time? Or I disagree, and I'm going to go ask this individual or these individuals a tough question. So I've been really impressed. The Dartmouth Political Union hosts, really has excellent programming. As they did, they had a couple of debates. They had a debate on abortion last year. They had a debate on diversity, and all of these events went off without any issues, without any protests, without any disruptions. And I think, and then we also support Rockefeller Center, Dickey Center, Political Economy Project, Middle Eastern Studies, LALAX, Women and Gender Studies. They're all having events weekly that some might say, wow, well, this one's about Venezuela. Wow, like who's that going to draw in? Or this one's about communism. Or this one's about victimhood in Israel and Palestine. Like this might be controversial, but everyone's prepared. And for the most part, everyone who attends is very respectful. So I've been really proud of the work that everyone has done at the institution, but really with our students leading the way. So.
I think this structure is so important because like you say, these are young people. Very brilliant, very smart young people, but they still are kids to a certain extent, like in society, you're talking 18 to 22. So I think it's nice that you guys are providing this structure and I hope that you're changing the culture. And it sounds like you might be. And of course, President Bylock has been very positive on freedom of expression and I guess controlled protest, sort of civic engagement with some boundaries. And I do think it's positive for the students to understand that there are some rules, boundaries, and expectations when it comes to free speech. Your free speech is not completely unlimited. You still have to abide by local and state laws, campus policy. So I'm hopeful that you're changing the culture as well, which it sounds like you might be.
Yeah, and I think what the couple of the steps we've taken, and specifically Jennifer Rosales, um, building relationships with those who might have stronger relationships with our traditionally active students, right? So our house professors have really strong relationships with these students. The Tucker Center, so our chaplain they have strong relationships. So, and I'm on the third floor of Collis with Opal. So we have now another program that I oversee is of staff. It's called the Trusted Advisors. So these are individuals mostly in the Office of Pluralism and Leadership that have relationships with some of these students that if there's a protest rally or demonstration that's unregistered, it's not just students, it's not an organization, I will ask these trusted advisors to go out there and just be a support. So a student knows them and says, okay, I actually feel that if I have a question, should I be blocking the sidewalk or am I going to get in trouble for blocking the sidewalk? I'm going to go ask so-and-so here because I know them and I trust them. Or that individual, the trusted advisor, can go over and say, listen, it's fine for you to be out here, but you don't want to block the stairs to Parkhurst, right? That's where you're going to cross the line. Or, hey, you can chalk all you want on the walkway around Parkhurst, but don't chalk on the side of the building, or that might result in a community standard referral. And then Jennifer's role is to have conversations with students if they're willing to. My role is to inform, and that's really to say, hey, these are the potential policy violations. We don't want you to be referred. And I also want you to let you know that in an hour, DOS might come approach you and ask for your IDs at that point. How can we prevent that from happening? So we're engaging in those conversations and employing others that these students might have relationships with so that they feel, again, like, all right, I'm not being intimidated, I'm not being harassed, I'm not being bullied, and I have someone here that I can trust. And again, as staff, I can go talk to a house professor and say, I'm going to go talk to the student over that's participating, and here's what I'm going to say, just so that there's multiple sets of ears, that they know my intention as far as that conversation goes. So yeah, I think we've done a really good job of having those conversations, and so students feel like that they're not going to just go protest in front of Parkhurst and the police are going to show up and just arrest them. Like we want to have a very intentional, mindful conversations first.
Thank you so much for that response. Let's go to Q&A. We have a number of questions here for Ed. Let's start with, I want to just clarify something about the Gaza encampment in 2024. Questioner says, I had understood that the students and organizations had been told ahead of time that they could not erect a tent city on the green and would be arrested if they did. Is that correct?
I'm pretty sure, and so I don't want to misstate. There was a message sent out by the provost that had iterated what the policies were. I cannot say for sure if it's said anything about arrest, and I don't want to misstate that, but I feel very confident that a message had gone out from the provost and or Eric Ramsey, who was the dean of student life or assistant dean of student life, I think, at the time, iterating what the policies were around protests. So I hope that
Um,
answers.
Thank you. The second question we have here is, since the protocol has been in place, has any organization been told that they have to cancel an event entirely or go on Zoom because of threats?
No, well, there's one, and again, I don't have the full. There's one. There was a graduate event, and I don't have all the details on this because I actually wasn't even brought into this. And the speaker rescheduled, and I think Fire actually made a note about this specific event in their latest ranking. Um, but that speaker was allowed to reschedule, and I think just never did. But that was one event that I think we got nicked on that I wasn't privy to. But as far as any other events that I've been aware of, no, absolutely not. And in fact, it's always been this event has to go forward. What are we going to do to ensure that it does go forward?
Thank you. The next question is, how do the roles and resources that Dartmouth has dedicated to promoting better engagement compare to what other colleges and universities are doing? Is there an emerging community of peers across institutions tackling similar issues and sharing best practices?
Yeah, so we have the Ivy Plus groups, and I'll say like when I came onto student life, my colleague and supervisor at the time was like, "Look at what Princeton is doing." And actually, we have their stop the cease this disruption card right here, and they had actually shared some of their work. So I had looked at what other institutions were doing, but built a lot of what we were doing for what Princeton had already been doing, and their open expression facilitator. It's called something different. They have staff like I think it's like 100 plus facilitators where we have I think 20 or so. Um, we're constantly looking at what other institutions are doing. I get reached out to maybe once a month or maybe a little less, asking how we address disruption and about the open expression facilitator program. So, and I'm always happy to share those with others. But there is the Ivy Plus group in student affairs. There are conversations around best practices and challenges pretty regularly when it comes to those things. So.
Thank you so much. What is being done apart from improving events and the security? There has been some mention of training provided to students. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's more, I would say, when a student org is planning an event. Well, so if it's a COSO student org, they actually have workshops. So the COSO advisors do a great job of offering various workshops to students, whether it's persistence, of the organization or they have event planning workshops where they'll talk about some of the things that they need to be mindful of. I will also reach out to the student orgs, and my role is overseeing the open expression facilitators and to say, here are some of the things that you should be thinking about. I also hold workshops for faculty and staff. My last one was this past fall. So it's basically event planning and disruption response. So anyone on campus if it's a department or a center, if they're thinking about having events, they can come to that and we go through, what they should be thinking about, whether it's an in-person event or a virtual event, how to respond to disruption, if there's a facilitator there, or if there's DOS there, or if they're not there, what that protocol looks like. So we do that for faculty and staff, and we do it for students, more specifically when we know they're hosting events. But also proactively, at least for the COSO organizations, which is the most, they have the 180 to 200 student organization. So.
Thank you. How does Dartmouth ensure that its responses to protests and controversial speakers are applied consistently, regardless of the political viewpoint involved?
Yeah, well, if I would encourage anyone to go to the Freedom of Expression and Dissent website, which is sites.dartmouth.edu/free expression, I think, free dash expression. You can just Google it and go to the FAQ, the frequently asked questions, and it talks about the recently revised and updated policy on free expression. I was on that committee. And Sam Levy did a masterful job of leading that committee and steering that committee. There's a report that goes through, that highlights and provides context on exactly what the committee was doing and what the impetus was for revising the free expression policy. And it was about content and viewpoint neutrality. So there should never be, and nothing should ever be silenced or shut down because of the views of what's being expressed. So we are very adamant about that, and I think we do a really good job of supporting all programs, all events, and not shutting down anything because of the political views or anything related to that. So.
Very nice, very nice. And a final question for you. What's your hope for Dartmouth going forward? What's your vision? Um, what is your hope for free expression and free speech at Dartmouth and the Ivy
Well,
League?
I want students to feel like they have a voice, and I think, and I'm not, again, as an administrator in community and campus life, I'm not on the academic side, but I hope, whether in the classroom or outside the classroom, students don't feel like they have to self-censor, that they feel safe, voicing opinions, again, inside the classroom, or whether it's through part of a recognized organization. I want student organizations to feel comfortable hosting high-profile guests, right? And I think we're there, with TPUSA, who had Will Witt, and had a recent conversation about ICE. Where I want them to feel confident that they can host those events. I want the Dartmouth Political Union to feel confident that they can have Scott Jennings and Anna Navarro here. There's not going to be a disruption. Or if there's going to be a disruption, they feel confident, even though it can be uncomfortable, on how to respond, and that there's going to be a process and it's not going to be chaotic. So, and I want staff and faculty to be educated on what free expression is and what our policies are. So if they have relationships with students, they can have a conversation with the student and say, yes, you can go ask tough questions, or yes, you can go express dissent. Here's what dissent is. Here's what disruption is. If your intent is to be disruptive, having a hard conversation and telling hard truths and saying, I understand why you want to be disruptive, or I understand why you feel so adamant about civil disobedience, but you need to know that there could be accountability with that, with disruption or with civil disobedience, that it might be a community standards referral, or if it's civil disobedience and continues, like it might go further than that. We want staff and faculty to be educated and having the correct conversations and honest conversations with our students, because they don't always want to come to me. I look like security, as has been noted. So we want to make sure everyone has the right information or has access to the right information. And I would say our Freedom of Expression and Dissent website does a really good job of highlighting, especially in the FAQ, the students' rights and responsibilities. So.
Thank you so much. I did have a couple more Q&A questions just come in, so I do want to
Okay.
get to our DFSA members before we conclude here.
Yeah.
It looks like another clarification on the Gaza protest. Did the organizers of the protest on the Green apply for a permit? If not, were they supposed to? I had understood that the organizers were told that the Green is a public space. The college will not allow it to be used by a group to push any message. Am I incorrect about that?
So the Green is it's privately owned by Dartmouth. It is not a public space. I have no idea what conversations they had. My understanding, if I recall correctly, is they did not have a permit, or apply for a permit. And a note on that, Jennifer initiated conversations. We now have a permit that only takes 2 days to turn around. It's a permit for rallies, demonstrations, and vigils. The regular permit, which is Ordinance 32 with the town of Hanover, is usually a 7-day turnaround. The event was organized by unrecognized student organizations and a community organization. The UVDSA was the community organization that was on hand. And so again, if there was not a permit that I am familiar with. So.
Okay, thank you so much. One more question for Ed. Does Ed feel generally supported in his mission by faculty and other staff?
Yeah, I definitely by staff, and I think faculty were building those relationships. And I think they see, how we approached there was a tent put up this past May 1st of 2025. there was a tent erected on the Parkhurst lawn. And I think faculty saw how we approached that, and it was very different. And so I think they are starting to trust what our intentions are. And so I think they're coming around as well. I can't speak for faculty. Hopefully they see the intentionality and mindfulness behind the work that we're doing.
Thank you so much. Ed, thank you again for your candor this evening and for walking us through how these issues look from inside the institution. One of the takeaways from tonight's conversation is how difficult it is to manage free expression in real time when events unfold quickly, emotions run high, and decisions have real consequences. For students and alumni, it's easy to see outcomes without seeing trade-offs, constraints, and operational realities. Conversations like this help fill in that gap. So on behalf of the Dartmouth Free Speech Alliance, thank you, Ed, for engaging seriously and openly. And thank you to everybody who joined us tonight for taking the time to be part of a thoughtful and substantive discussion. Good night.
Thanks.